Hello, hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome to 30 at 8:30. Come on in. Come on in. Hey, Sarah, how are you? Welcome back. What's up, Upala? Hi, Andrew. How are you? Good to see you. Hi, Shauna. How are you? As if you can see. I mean, it's just wave back or something. Hey, cousin. What's going on? Oh, I did get a wave. Thank you so much. What's going on? Favorite night of the week? All right now. What's up, Sean? How you doing? Oh my gosh, it's so good to see you guys. I tell you every week, it's literally like I'm getting a hug. I love it. Hey, Janelle, what's going on? How are you? Welcome, welcome, welcome. Come on in. Come on in. Welcome to 30 at 8:30. 30 at 8:30. Don't forget to hit share, y'all. Don't forget to hit share. See, y'all came out. The y'all. That's the southern y'all. That's from my people in the South in the U.S. Y'all. Welcome, y'all. Don't forget to hit share. We have an amazing guest. We're just going to do some housekeeping, but just, oh, it's so good to see you all. Really good to see you all. So 30 at 8:30 is a Instagram live series brought to you by the Center for Research and Innovation for Black Survivors of Homicide Victims, aka the CRIB, designed to just hold the space for 30 minutes every week for some of our most vulnerable, to uplift the voices of so many who feel voiceless. Now, before we get into our special guest, who quite frankly I have been anxiously awaiting to connect with. So I'm so glad you're here, Anthony. I again promised you that I will always uplift the voices of individuals who feel voiceless. And yet again, I am sad to say that I have to begin by paying my respects and condolences to the family and friends of Breonna Taylor, shot 8 times by police officers in her Louisville apartment. To be honest with you all, I look forward to every Wednesday with the CRIB community. I look forward to it because we're not only holding the space for some of our most vulnerable, but I truly feel held by all of you. And I struggled this week. I struggled by reading the newspapers of so many of Black and brown people who have been shot and killed in cities, alleyways, their own apartments. And I wrote a piece that I wanted to share with you. I went for a bike ride today, even though it snowed. I'm still thawing out. But as I rode freely on my bike, I kept thinking about Ahmaud Arbery and so many of us who continue to be hunted down like animals of inconvenience. And then the slaughtering of us is treated as such. The continued annihilation of us is just, I want it to end. I won't stop until it does. I'm not interested in going back to normal because, quite frankly, the way that we as a society have been behaving isn't and shouldn't be normal. Until we can be and do things differently, I'm not interested in going back to normal. So I thank you, CRIB community, for holding the space for me and so many others. Thank you for listening, and always thank you for tuning in. And now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our special guest. Anthony Morgan is a racial justice lawyer who practices in the areas of civil, constitutional, and criminal state accountability litigation. Anthony has a particular interest in anti-Black racism advocacy. He frequently provides legal, social, and public affairs commentary to local and international news media on issues concerning race, racism, critical multiculturalism, and critical race theory in Canada. Anthony's expertise builds on more than a decade of leveraging human rights law to address manifestations of anti-Black racism in Canada and internationally. Throughout his career, Anthony has advocated on matters related to anti-Black racism in Canada at various levels of court, appearing before the Supreme Court of Canada and before 2 United Nations Human Rights Committees in Geneva. Anthony Morgan, welcome to the Crib community.
Thank you.
We're delighted to have you.
I'm really happy to be here.
So delighted to have you. And although we have not officially met in person, I'm certainly an admirer of your work. So thank you so much for coming on 30 at 8:30 tonight. I'm ready to dive in. Are you ready to do this?
Absolutely.
You ready to do that? Okay, all right. So in a recent piece you published in Toronto Star, you wrote, like no other previous event, the COVID-19 outbreak is exposing the human rights crisis that is the contemporary prison. By its very nature, structure, and function, the institution as we know it invalidates the supposed universality of human rights as articulated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as well as the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, along with all other quasi-constitutional federal and provincial human rights legislation. Wow, mic drop. So let's start there. Tell us about that. Tell us about that nugget, because that's just,
Well, thank you for that. Well, before I start, I want to say it's really an honor to be a part of this conversation. Thank you for inviting me. You're doing a lot of great and important work by amplifying the voices of folks who don't often get these spaces. I certainly don't count myself among those because I have a level of access, but the work that you're doing in other spaces is really important and powerful to amplify those voices and experiences and help better the well-being of folks who are impacted by homicide and violence in our communities, especially Black folks. So I want to say that from the outset. But with respect to this article and the quote that you shared, I was speaking from a place as someone who's done this work for a few years in terms of work to address the systemic injustice in our criminal justice system and incarceration. And so I approach it from the level of being a professional, but in that article and specifically, I was honestly drawing a lot from the pain, the frustration, the hurt, and annoyance that I'm increasingly feeling. I've always felt, but feeling all the more because my brother is federally incarcerated in Ontario, and he has been for some time. And so just seeing the impact of COVID on already a very challenging situation for him. Him and I, we speak pretty much every day, just to check in, see how he's doing, and it's becoming so much clearer that I always knew the prison was a bankrupt concept in our modern concept when we think about freedom, justice, freedom of movement, even freedom of speech, freedom of association, the things that we can take for granted on the outside, even in this COVID context, they are very much luxuries on the inside. And then COVID hitting the prisons has made the very restricted, limited, or elimination of those rights even worse. And so that's where I'm coming from in that quote.
Wow. It was a powerful quote, and I was like, let's just start there. So thank you for your candor and honesty and coming and just elaborating further on that. So I wanna stick with the impact of COVID-19 on the incarcerated piece that you just landed there. So news outlets in the US and Canada are reporting COVID-19 outbreaks in prisons. For example, in Canada, the CBC reported that a Brampton jail shut down after 60 inmates and 8 staff tested positive for COVID-19. The rest of the population has been moved to the Toronto South Detention Center, a place where 3 inmates and 1 staff member have tested positive for COVID-19. In the US, the spread of COVID-19 at Rikers Island has been described as a public health disaster with over 200 confirmed cases. Those in prison and detention centers do not have the option of social distancing, accessing protective masks, and often do not have access to hand sanitizer or soap. What are the implications of the impact of COVID-19 on the incarcerated, employees who work there, and if I may just drop this big question, the criminal justice system as a whole?
Sure. I think for the individuals, those who are locked up and those who are employed in those institutions, they're, especially for racialized people, Black and Indigenous folks, and the elderly folks who are older on the inside, it ends up being effectively a death trap, where it's a kind of ticking time bomb, where at any moment, once one person gets impacted, it's almost guaranteed that several will be impacted because of how infectious COVID is. And so we're talking about, and I write about this in the article, the fact that physical distancing is not a real thing when you are incarcerated. You are regularly interacting with correctional officers who, by their training, have to be within a couple of paces of you if they're escorting you from one place to another. So that could be showers to food to programming. So those things are not happening, but still there is a level of movement on the inside. And even if it's not those interactions, just thinking about how small prison cells are, it doesn't offer a lot of room for physical distancing. Certainly, for sure, not 6 feet or 2 meters that is regularly called on. So they are institutions that actively are structured now in a way that violates the very public health orders that across the country. And so for inmates, it makes them tremendously unsafe, uncertain, scared. For folks who work on the inside, they have the same level of fear, anxiety, frustration, which unfortunately at times can lead them to be even more, frankly, callous and violent with inmates, or even sometimes retaliatory in a kind of way.
Sure.
Or just problematic. They could cite that for their own safety reasons, they have to keep certain people in segregation or in isolation, or individuals can't get the same kind of access to outdoors or programming the way they tend to. And so this is, I'm speaking from this by gathering from the various conversations I've had with my brother. And so that's for the inmates and for the correctional officers and folks who are employed on the inside. But for the broader system, I remain critically hopeful and will continue to support other advocacy and resistance so that we can move to a place where we really and truly take serious the question that many folks have put to us, but I think most specifically about Angela Davis's text, "Are Prisons Obsolete?" I think COVID offers us a resounding answer that really just reinforces what that text speaks about, the obsolescence of the prison as an institution, as a way of dealing with crime and punishment within our society. Just look at the factual record. It's not having a constructive effect on our society by and large. And so on the basis of that evidence alone, we need to re-envision new possibilities.
Re-envision new possibilities. You know I'm circling back to that. So get ready, because I'm circling back to that. Because I keep saying after every segment, after every episode, how do we pave a pathway forward? And I think this re-envisioning, if you will, of our systems that have inherently been fractured, have honestly contributed to a lot of the inequities that we saw before COVID-19, seen during COVID-19, and again, I hope we'll not see afterwards. So I'm gonna circle back to that. But some institutions, right, in an attempt to reduce the spread of COVID-19 among incarcerated populations, advocates and policy experts have called for the release of elderly people who are within months of scheduled release, people whose charges are classified as misdemeanors or non-violent felonies, and individuals with significant health risks, right? They've called for the release of these individuals. Once these vulnerable populations are released from prison, they too will need housing, employment, medical, and mental health care. How do we go about providing these services given the impact of COVID-19 on our systems of care?
So this is a challenge that a lot of jurisdictions are facing. I should say from the outset, for folks who are familiar with me and my work, they might have heard the bio and wondered, well, are you still working at the City of Toronto? I should say, just to be transparent and open on that, I am. But I'm not speaking in that capacity. I'm speaking from my personal capacity, drawing from my personal experience and years of experience outside of the city. Why I mention that here is because municipalities like the City of Toronto are grappling with that very same question. And so I don't want to act like that's not a part of the challenge, or some might say I'm a part of the system that is the problem in this context. So I want to be transparent about that. But what I think will really lead to the kinds of shifts that need to happen to provide folks who are being released with the supports they need, housing, employment, education, training opportunities. Fundamentally, at the risk of oversimplifying, I think we need to rehumanize these folks. I think there's a way in which folks who even just have a criminal charge against them, their humanity comes into question socially. We start to look at them suspiciously. They fall down in the ranks of valued beings.
Yes.
They are not even humans in some respects, I would say, because of the ways in which they end up being marginalized in a way that we feel perfectly comfortable with. But now, in the context of COVID, I would hope that many more are realizing that marginalizing, casting these folks out is actually putting us all in danger. It always did. It always did, but now most especially in the context of COVID. Right. Because either these folks are going to find themselves back in the street to make a way for themselves. And also part of their humanity is that they are almost always connected to people. They have family, they have children, they have sisters, brothers, parents, and their impulse towards their own humanity will make them want to find ways to take care of themselves or the people they care about, however that makes sense for them. And so if we if we're not serious about rehumanizing these folks, then we're not going to find housing for them. We're gonna put them in places that look like kennels because we see or think about them like animals, or we're going to drag our feet on getting them the income supports that they need. And so again, I know that there's very meaningful material interventions that are needed. We need to put money in their pockets. We need to help them get into programs and access to mental health and addiction services and the like. So I don't want to diminish that, but I think fundamentally as a society, we have folks who are incarcerated or who have been incarcerated. We need to examine ourselves and rehumanize folks who've been incarcerated and see them in the fullness of who they are.
Yeah. It's interesting. Every guest that we've had on 3830 has landed right where you are in terms of the fundamental sort of the foundation of it being sort of rehumanizing, re-envisioning, and understanding fundamentally at our core that we are inherently connected to one another for each other's survival, and that this is this places before us a unique opportunity to create policy, to create research and practice based upon that fundamental understanding. So I thank you for uplifting that here today. Rehumanizing. But contrary to rehumanizing was an interesting, I was reading an article, and it was a little scary, to be honest with you, and I wanted to get your take on this. This past September, the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights wrote a letter to the US federal government urging them to correct the racial and gender biases in the assessment tool algorithm entitled the Prisoner Assessment Tool Targeting Estimated Risk and Needs, aka Pattern. Pattern is designed to assign a recidivism score to each incarcerated person that predicts their risk of committing a new crime within 3 years after release. How might the use of this pattern algorithm further subjugate Black, Latino, and Indigenous populations who are overwhelmingly disproportionately represented in our prison system, but who might be considered for early release during COVID-19? This honestly is frightening to me, but I wanted to get your take.
Sure. So from the outset, I'll say that it's the pattern, the system that you're referring to, that algorithm, is not something that I've studied in depth. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to speak on it as if I've really looked in depth to understand it. That said, just thinking more generally about the scholarship and activism around the technology that has been inserted into the criminal justice system, by and large, there is an increasing consensus that it just reproduces the same systemic barriers and injustices and systemic racism for Black folks, Latino folks. In the Canadian context, you'd be thinking about Indigenous folks. Why? Because these algorithms overwhelmingly are structured, programmed, conceived, funded by people who look nothing like or have no similar experiences, barely can relate to or familiar with individuals who've lived on the inside of a prison cell for any number of days. And so there are biases that are built into these algorithms often. And even when these folks try to program against it, they're also very limited because they're still drawing on their own limited experiences. And so there are blind spots that they don't even realize that they have. Not to use an ableist term, not that they're blind spots. There are points of their analysis they don't realize are not illuminated. They can't engage them because their experience is so limited. And so I worry about these kinds of technologies simply just replicating the same injustices and looking for sort of the perfect prisoner as the ones to release and needing this very pristine profile. And I'll also added to that the fact that these, for the reading that I have done on this, like drawing on the work of Benjamin, and I think about Bill's work as well, folks who've explored the ways in which technology has, and also I was saying Alexander, looking at the ways in which these algorithms are often constructed in a way that's decontextualized. So you don't think about, well, what role did this upbringing have in their lives?
Thank you. Yeah.
So it could be child welfare. It could be early incarceration of a parent. It could be immigration status. It could be having a learning disability. There are so many factors that come into play that bring a person in the face of the justice system. And as far as I've read, there's very nominal consideration.
And ditto, exclamation point. I mean, someone wrote what factors are being used to determine risk, but moreover, I think that you're also sort of alluding to one of the things that just gets in my crux is sort of this. We talked about it in a previous session, but that there's this sort of intersection between, the victim and perpetrator. And that if we only just talk about or possibly dig deeper in terms of understanding individuals' trauma histories, right? What type of violence have they been exposed to? Like, what are their trauma histories that perhaps have gone unnoticed, unchecked, mental health issues that haven't even, been unearthed, that, could certainly help someone, right? Who, is currently incarcerated, but really kind of unpack that for them and allow them to quote unquote heal. I mean, it's just, yeah. But I keep going back to rehumanizing, I think is a great word. So thank you for that. Other people are asking, but I just want to, so, because I want to make sure the crib community gets a chance to ask their questions as well. But COVID-19 has in some ways given us an opportunity to reimagine our criminal justice system, to reimagine how we can address issues of structural inequality and meet the needs of some of our most vulnerable. What should a reimagined criminal justice system look like?
I think we need to ask the folks who are incarcerated, ask the folks directly impacted.
How about that?
Yeah.
Can you say that again?
Ask the folks who are incarcerated, the folks who are experiencing this, who have experienced the brunt of this. Ask them and their families and communities. And I think there we would start to get some really powerful answers as to how we re-envision this whole structure. Because even as the way in which you frame the question, our criminal justice system, of course, respectfully, I would also say that is it really our system? This is not our system. Black folks is not our system. Racialized folks is not our system. Folks who experience addictions and mental health, this is definitely not our system. And we can go down the line. So then the question is, whose system is this? Look at the facts. Look at who's overrepresented. Look who gets positive treatment, negative treatment. Look at the face, the bodies, the lives that are destroyed by these systems. And then it gives us a clear sense of whose system this really is. And so the reimagining means taking that system back, and then doing what I think will be the natural outcome of that is we dismantle it. And we find other ways to deal with I'm not saying that there are not instances of individuals who use violence against people, against families, against others in their communities. I'm not saying we folks just need to walk around freely. What I'm saying, we've used the model for a couple hundred years that is not working. Not working. So we need to do something very different. Yeah. And the real answers will come from the folks most deeply impacted.
I love that. Uplift the voices of individuals directly impacted by it. Couldn't said it better. So I want to take some questions from the audience. And so, better, they continue to put people to, comment on each of the research. Someone commented on the research that highlights the pipeline from child welfare to judicial and school to prison. How can we look at the system with an anti-racism lens? But I think that you're touching upon that, right? You're touching upon the way that we do that is by certainly talking to individuals that are directly impacted. Is there more in terms of being able to look at reimagining the systems through an anti-racism lens?
Yeah, speaking specifically for the experiences of Black folks, I would say not for that experience, but to that experience, we have to historicize it. We have to recognize that the inside of a slave ship looks a lot like the inside of prisons. If you look at how compacted these folks are, the limited access to food, supports, all that, it's just a tortured experience, quite similar. And so we have to, if we really want to unpack these, really think about, well, how is this a part of course, what Saidiya Hartman refers to as the afterlives of slavery? And it becomes clear when we make those historical connections. I think I've seen and heard many Indigenous elders, organizers, and community members talk about, of course, colonization as well, the way in which you control a people by sectioning them off into a place that is out of sight, out of mind, and you deprive them of necessary resources for their well-being. What does that sound like? That sounds like a prison. Right. So we see that kind of carceral logic of colonization and play out for Indigenous folks. And so it's different histories, different experiences, and I don't want to be heard to be making false equivalences. But the point is, those oppressions reverberate. Those historical repressions are not, or oppressions are not historical facts. They reverberate into the present.
Repeating our history. Wow, repeating our history. But also, I totally agree. And someone actually mentioned the economic benefits to maintaining, right? That there's certainly an economic benefit to maintaining and upholding the structure that you actually just really talked about. And so if we know that economic gain is part of the impetus, if you will, of creating the structure, of keeping the structure in place, are there things that we need to reimagine, if you will, regarding the economic gain that will allow for that sort of agenda to be put at bay, if you follow me?
Yeah. Well, I think, again, the question is economic gain for who? So definitely it's creating economic benefit.
Yeah.
Not for Black folks. Overwhelmingly not, and certainly not for Indigenous folks, Latino folks, I could say, queer and trans folks. There's a whole bunch of communities that are disproportionately impacted. And so them and their communities are not finding the benefit. So again, it's whose priorities are we centralizing? Whose interests are we centering in this conversation? Because if it was the communities most impacted, then we wouldn't even see the economic benefit of it. We recognize that it's overwhelmingly detrimental and harms us generationally.
Yeah. Mic drop again, fire, mic drop. Yes, indeed. So we ask this question of all our guests. As we move through this global pandemic and consider the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on the incarcerated, what might be the call to action for research, for policy, and practice?
Sure. So there's a lot of good work being done. I really want to take the time that we have to shout out, for instance, the Canadian Prison Law Association. There's also the Toronto Prisoners' Rights Project. I am looking at a list because I wanted to make sure.
Go ahead, say it.
Pasan, another organization in the city of Toronto. Nikki Knows, Think Twice, Suhail Ben Sliman, the Canadian HIV/AIDS Legal Network. There's also a prisoner emergency support fund. There are folks like Robin Maynard, Al Jones. There's a whole list of folks doing excellent work. There are some very nefarious things about technology, but there are parts of technology that are great. So now if you were to just Google prison rights advocacy in your city, you'll likely find somebody, a collective, an organization that you can support, or is doing a letter writing campaign, or is doing caravans to carceral spaces, also immigration detention centers as well, just to let the folks know on the inside that we have not forgotten them, and we are riding hard for them and their release, and wanting to see them healthy and home before long. So there are a number of ways we can do that.
Seeing and hearing and being in the work and doing the work is what I'm hearing from you, Anthony Morgan, and I can't thank you enough for that work that you're doing, again, from both your head and heart space. So I thank you for that, as does the Crib community, as you can see. And so I thank you so much for coming on tonight to our 3830 show. And I hope that you and I will continue this conversation, because you and I, this is long overdue.
Indeed.
We just need to schedule some time to have Zoom coffee. My life is one big Zoom meeting, but to certainly do that, I would love to do that if you're available.
Really,
for sure.
There's so much work to be done.
So, Crib community, if you want to reach us, please send us a direct message at the Crib community, or visit us at www.the-crib.org. And as always, until next week, from our crib to yours, stay safe and keep well. Thanks, Anthony.
Thanks for having me.